Welcome to another episode of the FMCG Guys. I'm your co-host, Daniel Torres. Before we start the show today, I wanted to thank you as part of our audience for following us. We have now updated our website, making it hopefully more intuitive and with faster loading times, and something that I like a lot, a search tool. I hope you enjoy it. Check it out, play around with it. Also, if you're not yet, which you probably are, remember to follow us on LinkedIn, as well as our US sister podcast, the CPG Guys. Brian, Shri, and Peter are producing 2 weekly episodes where they go deep into the omni-commerce world. So if you're interested, for example, in the latest content related to retail media from the other side of the Atlantic, this is your show. So take some time to explore that. And also, if you haven't yet and you're a usual listener, please take a minute to leave a review on whichever podcast player you're using. Your feedback and endorsement is of tremendous value to us. So today, lucky enough to be accompanied by Christina Nicolaou as a co-host. Hi, Christina.
Hi, Daniel. Good to see you for yet another FMCG wisdom drop.
Exactly. And today I'm excited to have somebody from the brand side, as you will have read in the show notes, and who's actually repeating on the show, having had a chat with him at Shop Talk 2022, which I'll leave the link to that conversation in the show notes. So Iradj Boroumand is the head of e-commerce at SC Johnson, one of the leaders in FMCG home care. I would say that one thing that distinguishes SC Johnson to the competition is that they are very proudly a family company and is privately owned, which is not that common, is it, Christina?
True. And we have yet another e-commerce guy, and digital seems to be getting higher and higher on our agenda. And given my background, I'm super happy about this. So SC Johnson, indeed, they're quite impressive, I would say, on how much forward they're getting with their digital transformation. And given that, they are more on, you expect a family company to be more on the traditional side, they have a quite significant digital presence. So I'm very keen to say what the conversation will be about today.
Yeah, my suspicion is that Iradj will challenge the stereotypes. So we invited him to understand the latest developments on his side in European e-commerce from a brand perspective, to understand, for example, the latest developments at Amazon, media mix measurement, and the value of clean rooms and more.
For those of you who don't know me, the name's Iradj Boroumand, and I'm the European e-commerce director at SC Johnson. Have been with them for 3.5 years, and have actually been within e-commerce for, would say, about 8 to 9 years now. FMCG for about 15 years. So started my career at Kimberly-Clark in the UK, did various different sales and marketing roles, and then did a short stint at Lavazza Coffee. So managed to go into a very exciting category as well, working for a brand that wasn't market leader. So that was also nice to, at least in the markets I was working in. And then now 3.5 years at SCJ, and maybe I can tell you a bit more about what I do there. It's very much responsible for anything and everything you can think about within e-com. So driving the strategic thinking across marketplaces, pure players, brick and clicks, quick commerce, our brand.com sites as well, and making sure we future-proof processes, technology, people, structure, everything you can really think about when you deal with digital. So I also have a big digital media piece within my role. So it's pretty omni-channel, you can think about it. I'm originally Belgian, but Persian, hence the name as well. And currently reside in Switzerland.
I never asked you, Iradj, about your origin, actually. So I'm glad to know that you're Persian originally. And I have to say, welcome back to the podcast after a brief appearance in 2022.
Yeah, this one's a bit better planned, I feel. Like the one we did in 2022, you just bump into me in Shop Talk and say, hey, shall we just run a 5-minute podcast? So, no, it's nice to be back on the FMCG Guys podcast. And yeah, happy to have this chin wag, as we say in British, with you guys on some very interesting topics.
Exactly.
Yeah, those impromptu ones also have a certain, let's say, edge to them as well. But it's great to have you here, Iradj, and thank you for finding the time, because I know like there is all about digital still in terms of focus and quite a lot of work in, especially in a role with such a big remit. And I was wondering, like, what led you into e-commerce and digital and what you're doing now? What's the path?
It's very interesting because from a consumer perspective, I've been like an Amazon Prime shopper, I think since 2006 or something stupid, when, in the UK, you were buying books at the time. So I remember at uni, I was buying my books through Amazon at the time. And I was doing a small career change at Kimberly-Clark, was coming from the B2B to the business to consumer side. And I noticed this opportunity to manage Amazon and Ocado, and I thought, I think my skill set could lend itself well to it. I understand key account management pretty well, and this idea of taking something at the time, we didn't really have a solid joint business plan in place yet. It was fairly new. I thought this could be a nice way of expanding my knowledge within sales and focusing a bit more on something that I thought was going to be a lot more relevant in the future. Because in 2015, 16, it was still kind of, bets were still out in terms of, yes, they were stealing share, but how much user adoption would we get on some of these platforms? It wasn't as sticky as what it is today. So certainly not in Europe. So I felt like I naturally gravitated to it. And honestly, ever since I started operating in this field, I think I'm naturally curious about things. I like reading up. So this is an area where it's just you need to naturally keep challenging yourself to understand what does status quo look like tomorrow, because the status quo from yesterday means you're lagging behind for tomorrow. So I like that idea of anything within digital, is that it's constantly evolving and it's super dynamic.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, when you started e-commerce, I think it's when FMCGs were like starting to figure it out and really starting like that they would have to work with retailers in order to grow that channel. And obviously we've gone a long way. How do you see the e-commerce market in Europe right now for FMCGs from your position?
Yeah, so it's honestly, I would say it's a tough environment. Just when you look at it from a digital commerce, omni-commerce, however you want to call it, right? When we call it e-com, it has people are now coining the phrase channelless. Too many words flying around, so let's use them interchangeably, knowing they kind of all connect to one another. The way I'm looking at it is that, well, first of all, households are hit very hard by the inflation. So you're seeing a bit of a dynamic where people are really looking at their disposable income, looking how much they can afford on, I would say, non-essentials. And even on the essentials, you're starting to see private label, where brands are not as established. You start seeing private label making a bit of a move, which is to be expected, just like discounter channels become more relevant in an environment like today's. What's interesting, though, is that actually post-pandemic, you saw a small drop in some of the, shoppers that were going in a Tesco or a Carrefour, they, buying online, they went back in store because they were allowed to. But interestingly, we're still seeing very high user adoption levels, even within brick and click as well. So some people would have thought the regression would have been a lot harder. But from our perspective, we're still seeing people that started buying during the pandemic. Many of those stuck, which makes sense because they tend to say you need to buy between 2 to 5 times online to start becoming sticky. So I think people had enough opportunities during the COVID pandemic to actually get to that threshold to become a sticky online user. So I think that's definitely one dynamic. And the flip side of the coin is that you're seeing retailers fighting profitability from their side as well, because to them, shipping the last mile to the consumer is not exactly very efficient and very profitable. So interesting communications when you look in the UK or some other markets of retailers trying to, charge money for some of those last mile deliveries, rightly or wrongly. That's a debate for another day. But so I see those two very conflicting dynamics of actual brick and click retailers or your typical brick and mortar who don't particularly want to make it bigger than what it is today. because it doesn't help their P&L, but knowing that consumer demand is still there and it's going to be ever growing, because the convenience of getting home delivery or having click and collect is something that's not going to go away from our society, especially not in the more mature markets. So that's definitely a dynamic you see. And you see Amazon's pivoting in their last 2 or 3 shareholder reports. You see that as well towards profitability. So they're pivoting some of their innovation. They're still doing their moonshot innovation. They're still going to look at all of that. Of course, it's not going to disappear. But you're starting to see them also look at, okay, well, what does innovation look like within our value stream? Like, how can we find ways to drive operational efficiency, to lower some of our variable costs in the value stream and try to drive some profit back into the business. So Andy Jassy coming into that seat has definitely shown some of that pivot as well.
And for sure, like during the pandemic, there was this big boom of digital and this craziness that, okay, everything is going digital now. And all e-commerce businesses have those tailwinds to help them grow and expand like really, really fast. But I'm wondering, like, do you see that there are specific behaviors that during this period really changed and they're here to stick, as you said, even though we did see that the growth of digital has slowed down now, of course, and it's relatively close to the lines that we were expecting on pre-pandemic levels.
Yeah, again, I think it's this idea of different shopping missions and not being like, I think we should think of our consumers as channel agnostic, because they don't just shop online or they don't just shop in store. I think, again, through the pandemic, we can see that many shoppers, may have gravitated back to the store as well, but they may have continued some of their shopping trips, whether that's top-up shops or some of the pantry type buys they would do if you look at it in the US. They may have pivoted those more to an online channel. So I think this idea of people completely going back in store is probably not the case, and we start seeing online playing a role. Also, just this idea of it influencing sales in store. I think there's this statistic that something like 70% is going to be digitally influenced by 2025 or 2026. I can't remember the exact year, but that's not a surprise. I'm actually amazed it's only 70%, because who doesn't go on their phone and look stuff up or even just scan a barcode or a QR code to look at doing some price matching. So I really internally always push our organization, and I'm sure my peers do as well, to not just look at online as a conversion driver, but to really say this is where the attention of the consumer sits today, and that's where we need to be. And that's where you see media ecosystems gravitate to as well. So for me, so the consumer habit is the one of multiple shopping missions, and online being more frequently within that. But if I think of it from the way companies have kind of behaved since, you're starting to see media dollars shift more actively away from traditional linear TV into the digital ecosystem. And some have been very quick to play at that. I guess a Nike or fashion brands in general tend to have a strong play there. FMCG tends to lag a bit at times on some of those, but definitely have a role to play there. So you start seeing that. And of course, then I'm not going to over-elaborate the rise of retail media, which I think we're all very familiar with. But these retail media ecosystems, with Amazon being a good example, not the only example, of course, because the likes of Tesco, etc., in Europe are doing a lot of good work there as well. You start seeing that becoming a very big pillar of retailers and also for brands in terms of how they target consumers.
Yeah. And you talk about like a lot of consumers going online to make a buying decision. How are these people actually checking out the product? Because I think that research shows they go more to Google. Some people also play the importance of Amazon. What's your take on that?
Honestly, it's evolving rapidly, right?
Wait a minute, maybe I got it wrong. Actually, I think it's people start searching at Amazon more than Google.
Yeah, like products, if you think of product searches, just to be very specific, product searches, we have now more product searches on Amazon than we would have on Google. You'd still have your question type, queries, open questions, they'd probably land in Google more often than anything. So you really think about, if we think about product categories, you think, is a shopper very familiar with the brand or product type, or will they look at a problem and trying to fix a problem? And that kind of guides you a bit more on where do we believe the query is going to land.
Yeah.
So that's always important to bear in mind. But yeah, of course, a lot of product queries start on Amazon. People don't even go into a search engine anymore. But interestingly, there's this idea of, and this is coming more from the Asian markets, of, social commerce stealing a lot of and social media in general, just becoming this new playground where people are being introduced to products through social media content. And that's the next converge. So, the previous convergence we saw was this idea of digital, physical merging together. Some people coin it, the phrase phygital. So, you see Amazon venturing into stores, you see brick and mortar going online, and then that naturally starts blurring the lines between what is the traditional pure player versus what is a traditional brick and mortar. And so you start that convergence. I think the next convergence that's fully underway is how do retail media ecosystems and ecosystems in general get attention from people, whilst actually all the eyeballs are going towards social media. And then it's very simple that social media platforms are saying, well, we should make this a commerce platform as well. TikTok being a great example. So to me, that's again where I think people's attention naturally sits. Whether one has the benefit of having the attention, but may not have an elaborate commerce platform behind it. The other has the benefit of having a very strong, mapped out commercial proposition, but may not naturally have all the attention, or the attention where a consumer is willing to spend time. That's because it's not just about someone browsing on Amazon. You'll have limited opportunity in terms of how much time you can get with the consumer, whereas on TikTok or Instagram, you could be scrolling for days, basically. So those are some of, go ahead.
I just want to say that it's really, really interesting how we jumped from Amazon and to Google and then back to social media. And if you look at the funnel, most FMCG companies would place Google and social media on the upper part of the funnel, and they would be adamant that Amazon is a transaction channel, right? This is where people go to buy. But when we think of Amazon as a place where people go to search and learn and perhaps have those, even from awareness or consideration points rather than transactions, I'm wondering, you mentioned channel-less before, and is it really just e-commerce? Is it really just a transaction channel and a selling channel, or does it play multiple roles? How do you treat it?
So actually, Christine, if you would be in a meeting with me and you would throw the word funnel around, I would say, guys, there is no such thing as a funnel. Because first of all, media to me is non-linear. It doesn't have this, I've just become aware of the product, I'm going to consider buying it, and now I'm going to buy it. That's kind of the basics of purchasing heuristics, which in any sort of consumer behavior textbook, they would probably throw at you. That's kind of how we become aware. And there are ways that the brain bypasses some of those consumer heuristics. Especially when it's impulse buying, you're not going to go through that. You see a candy bar and you think, okay, I'll just buy that because I fancy it. That's all those stages in a very short period. And that's how typically I think advertisers and media agencies look at funnels. And to your point, we have this upper, middle to lower funnel, but it very quickly puts ecosystems into buckets and puts where we believe the consumer is, and we think, that's naturally a conversion opportunity, or this is naturally an awareness driving opportunity. Let's look at cost per mil, or let's look at number of views this has generated versus the return on ad spend and the number of purchases we generated. Actually, to me, and this kind of then comes back to the idea of how do we measure the efficiency and effectiveness of the media we are running. And in the old days, you'd look at media mix modeling, you do a top-down approach, you look at it over a long-term period. And that works, but it really takes some of that consumer-level data out of the thinking. It looks at it more at an aggregate level. What I think really is the present and the future of the way we look at measurement of media, and this is where then I'll answer your question, Christine, on where does Amazon sit, or where does some of these other platforms sit in terms of conversion only versus being an actual full media ecosystem, is the fact that if you look at media measurement through the lens of data attribution, you can actually start understanding how each touch point within the path to purchase actually impacted the sale. And please bear with me on this one because it's important to wrap your head around. So very often today, what we will do is we will say consumer clicked on search display A and bought the product. So we're going to say that search display A generated a return on ad spend of 5x what we put as our bid for that. But what we don't take into account was the 4, 5, 6 times the consumer was exposed to the product beforehand. Why is it only the last click that gets all the credit? And that's the natural flaw of looking at last click attribution models, but it's a starting point to say the least. So Amazon introduced that, looking at a 14-day attribution through the last click. What I believe is kind of the holy grail is to say, actually, no, we should look at all the touch points within that path to purchase and try to understand what is the weight and importance of each of those touch points on the final sale itself. So the way that gets done is through Markov models. So if any one of you ever wants to learn more about that, just go into Google, type in Markov models, and you can learn more about that. Daniel, I know you want to chime in.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, how do you do that? Like, how can you isolate someone and find all the touch points that they've had with your brand? Like when you're trying to sell like a duck cleaner, from SC Johnson, like how do you know all the at least digital touch points that the consumers had with that brand?
So I think the first reaction to that is, Daniel, if you were my consumer, I would never know it was you. And I think that's very important because with GDPR and all the that are coming in, Apple's opt-in, on any app that you use to say that you are agreeing to get data, the deprecation of the cookie. There's a lot of things happening that really steer us away from gathering personal identifiable information, PII data. But the great news is that many of the big online ecosystems, digital ecosystems, are actually pivoting to data clean rooms. Data clean rooms are basically an area where people's personal identifiable information becomes pseudonymized, and you become part of an audience cohort. So Daniel, you could be tell me what's your favorite band or music act that you'd listen to?
If I had to choose one, I would say the Beatles.
The Beatles. All right. So you could be part of a cohort that listens to the Beatles, that loves pets and loves eating sushi on a Sunday, just to make something up now. But I wouldn't know that it's you, Daniel Torres Dwyer, who lives at this address I wouldn't know that. You would be a random denominator within that cohort, but I know what some of your user characteristics are. In this case, it would be based on past purchase behavior. It would be based on past browsing behavior. So I know that your lifestyle is liking hiking and listening to 60s music, for example. So the good news is that through a data clean room, we are able to connect all different, so we can get data in a very secure way, which means we're not breaching any GDPR laws, but we can actually start running queries within that environment to understand things like where did my consumer cohort see ads and where was the overlap? So did I run multiple campaigns and was there overlap within my audiences? So then I can start understanding, okay, are there different areas where I can target my consumer, and how was that a better path to purchase than another path could have been? So really these data clean rooms are the facilitator. The likes of Amazon, Meta all have their own, media agencies create them as well. And they create a space where we can securely, without compromising consumer privacy, start running the analysis we want to do.
I mean, it's all about data at this point, right? It feels like it's kind of like the gold of the future, and every company is trying to put their hands on as much data as they can. And I guess that this is a completely different strategy than just trying to drive sales and have a channel where you started, as you said, with I thought that, okay, I can do account management. Here are some new accounts where I can grow my sales, let's say, skills and put them to good use for something for the future. So I'm wondering how different should the data strategy of the company be? And putting, let's say, a dotted line to how should the structure within the company be when it comes to digital? At this point, it's usually kind of a sidecar function. There is even a chief digital officer. Should it be completely different because it should be a data-driven strategy? Should it be embedded?
So look, an overall data strategy is a lot bigger than just the data we get on digital, right? The chief data officer would cover a lot. Is the whole data architecture. Well, how do we look at data governance? What does the roadmap look like of all the data we actually even want to start looking into and ingesting through a cloud or a data lake? So I think the role that the chief or a chief digital, or even just if I come back to your first part of your question, the role we have to play in and what the secret sauce is behind understanding data is making sure that you bring business owners together with the people that know how to manipulate data. That's the starting point, because there's two schools to this. Either you could start by understanding what data do I have available and what information could I extract from it, or you could talk to your business owners and say, what would you like to know about your business, and then see whether the data can answer that for you. So actually bringing both together allows you to tackle it from both ends. And it's really, you need to start with your discovery piece. What data actually exists in our business? Because the concept of dark data existing in your business without you being aware of it, is very prevalent. There's a lot of dark data in organizations, like a lot of third-party data that we get that we may not even be leveraging to its fullest extent. So I always start with a discovery piece, really understand what are those use cases we want to get stuck into, and then you start partnering with your data analysts or even data scientists if you want to run more predictive models in the background, and start, I would say, it's moving the conversation from understanding what is happening in your business to why it's happening, what could happen in the future, and what can I do about it. And that's kind of the natural evolution of going from descriptive analytics into predictive and prescriptive analytics. And that's a journey you take. You need to be very specific about the use cases you go after. And then the role, coming back to your second part, the role a chief data officer plays and chief digital are more around long-term strategy of, and those two should be connected to one another in terms of what they do, is what does our data strategy look like, and what does the right structure look like behind that, but also digitally, what do we need to do the right measurement? And let's be honest, every media dollar we invest counts. So how do we make every media dollar go that little bit further than it went yesterday?
One thing that we've seen happen a lot in e-commerce in Europe in the last year, which has dominated the conversation together with AI, which has been more of a global thing, is the emergence of retail media. How have you seen that change your conversation at SC Johnson with the big retailers that are starting their own retail media networks, like, Carrefour, Auchan, Tesco? They're working a lot on them.
Look, well, first of all, it's changing the need in terms of how we think of overall media planning with some of the more traditional retailers. Long gone are the days where 95% of your budget sits on in-store execution, and then, let's maybe place one or two banners online and see what goes, right? I think that's how many of us used to fall into working with brick and mortars in the past. Now it's very much around, okay, actually the retail media possibilities we have extended a lot more, whether that's through access through club card data or, data where we can understand more about consumer behavior. We can target specific audiences based on actual purchase behavior and browsing behavior. And I think that's the beauty of where we are naturally gravitating to. Broad marketing in general is not very sticky. It just doesn't stick. You don't want to be targeted by these. Broad marketing works for certain brands, for certain product groups. But for some of our categories we're in, we really need to start looking more at the narrower targeting, and retail media gives you a good option to start narrow and go broad and not always have to go broad from day one. So I think that's definitely a pivot we're seeing, understanding audiences better and how we, or cohorts, if I use those interchangeably, how we can talk with those cohorts and what media tactics exist is definitely a shift we're seeing. I also notice retailers now and then pivot from fixed models into variable models so that there's more bidding happening on the white space, because the starting point is you want the white space to sell on your .com. Once you've sold the white space and you sell it regularly, then you think, okay, how do I get everyone to compete for the white space? And a variable bidding model as CPM or a CPC model allows you to do that. So there's definitely some retailers that have gravitated more towards a variable model, and that's where you see the likes of Citrus Ads and Criteo popping up as well in that space, aggregators that make it easier to access some of those platforms, and you don't have to go through the retailer's own media platforms.
And I feel like apart from the fact that retailers are selling, let's say, channelless, as you said before, or in an omni-channel way, or whichever buzzword, it's also kind of like changing the narrative, their offerings, actually what they do, because they are no longer just selling products to consumers, which they buy from suppliers, but going backwards, they have started selling media to suppliers, which I think is fascinating, and we'll definitely see more things happening in that space and how retail evolves. And on that note, you mentioned before a lot social commerce, for example, in China, and we have seen that there are these new, more entertaining and in many cases even immersive experiences in retail happening. But I would say that from what I read and observe, these are more tailored towards more luxury offerings or trends or fashion. Do you think that in the FMCG world, like the household items that we worry here about, will we see those trends coming anytime soon? And not just China, like Europe?
Look, there are a lot of trends happening, whether it's from the social commerce piece to Web 3.0 and people venturing as part of Web 3.0, venturing into the space of the NFTs, or actually starting to venture into creating their own metaverse spaces or proto-metaverses building on Web 2.0. Again, fashion, luxury brands tend to lead the way in this space just because, well, let's be honest, if you want to buy a $300 virtual sneakers, you need to be committed to buying those. But somehow people do, and when you look at the gross merchandising value of some of these companies, it's impressive at the amount of revenue some of them are generating. So I like to think that it's and people in my position, we have a responsibility to make sure we educate businesses like the ones we're in on what does the future hold, because frankly speaking, the future, things like Web 3.0 is naturally going to also drive evolution of the roles we do, because we're going to evolve in that. And as augmented reality gets more mainstream, people will naturally venture more into virtual reality as well, because that's the next step to the augmented reality. So Apple coming out with their new set, which has a good focus on mixed reality as well. The more we combine the real world with some of the virtual things, it will naturally drive user adoption. And you just have to look at Gen Z adoption of some of these technologies, and you can start seeing that we're a few generations away from it becoming mainstream. So is that something that as a CPG company we should be investing all our time and effort in? No, it's the shiny object right now still that's there, and it's good to be aware of. Are there opportunities to partner with some retailers on some of these initiatives and learn more? Why not? Like, I see Carrefour playing a lot in that space. They launched their NFBs, and where they did like a sustainability partnership to help, make sure there's enough bees around. And
yeah, they're doing a lot of stuff lately.
They created their own. Sorry, Daniel.
No, they just said that Carrefour just did the partnership with Publicis, so they're making a lot of noise in the industry. By the way, if someone from Carrefour is hearing us, they're more than welcome to come on the podcast. I'm trying, but no response yet.
Okay, well, Let's plug other REIT. No, I'm joking. Of course, they're more than welcome. No, but I hear a lot of noise from them as well, and it's nice to see that they're actually investing some time and effort. I think they even created a Fortnite map as well, which had a Carrefour supermarket in it. So it's fun to watch what they're doing. So again, we very often think this is very far away from home, all these things, but before you know it, it's there. And we actually just set up a virtual reality academy room here in our office as well, just to get marketeers more familiar about what it is to venture into a Decentraland or Sandbox or a metaverse space, how to use collaborative whiteboards, or even if they just want to meditate in a corner, they can meditate using some VR as well. So there are definitely a lot of trends there. Again, social commerce to me is a lot closer to home. It's definitely something where we are investing a lot more time and effort in, because frankly speaking, that's where many of our consumers are as well. And as we want to drive the next generation of future buyers into some of the brands and categories we're in, you have to be playing on those platforms. And they're very different and new to how we've done it before. You know, very often this content is organically done. You don't vet everything off the bat. And, you know, it's a big pivot on, you know, what does an ambassador look like on a social media platform? Who do you want to have as your brand ambassador? There's a lot to take into consideration. But to me, social commerce is something that will become more prevalent within CPG as well.
So at the end of the day, it's about now building the capabilities and getting the knowledge you need to serve the future consumer, right? Even if it's not something that immediately is going to bring revenue.
Yeah, it's exactly that. You don't want to be the late adopter in the game. You want to be able to future-proof your business, to be able to act fast when these technologies become more mainstream and embedded in the way consumers act and transact.
Or maybe we'll see something completely different come up as well. But it's all on the table, I think, no?
And again, that's the beauty of it, right? When you ask me, you know, why did I venture in, then how did I venture in? It's exactly this part where you literally don't know what's going to come tomorrow. And if somebody could have told you 3 months or 5 months ago that ChatGPT was going to be the buzzword of the last 3 or 4 months, you wouldn't have guessed it either. So it's nice to see how all of a sudden AI picks up, and the great possibilities and the few risks it brings as well. But that's the beauty of the space we operate in. And as long as we're curious about it, then it means working in digital is always something that's going to keep you on your toes.
Yeah, exactly. And Iradj, we did refer at the beginning of the conversation to your path to where you are now. If you had to go back to yourself at the beginning of your career as you were starting off, knowing what you know now, what would be the one piece of advice you would give yourself?
The one piece of advice I'd probably give myself is that, sorry, it's funny, someone just literally walked in. That always happens, right? As we need to be spontaneous on these podcasts. Very often when you start roles in e-com and digital, you ask yourself the question, will you know everything that this role entails? And the honest answer is very often you won't, because it's so hybrid, it's so cross-functional, that eventually you're either going to have to learn it on the job, or you're going to have to bring the right group of people in, or a combination of the both. More the latter, to be honest with you. So if I could tell my younger self something, it would be, don't worry if you read a job description and you don't know every single line of that job description, because there's a good chance 99% of the population doesn't either. Because the unicorn that needs to manage all of these different e-com pieces, you need to be skilled at supply chain, marketing, finance, key account management, negotiation, media buying, especially when you're in the roles that oversee many of these things. That's something you're not going to all know from scratch. So my younger self, I would say, be curious, be willing to take yourself out of your comfort zone, and know that you are going to apply for things in your career where you are naturally not going to know about it, and you're going to have to learn fast, and be willing to learn fast. And once you're open to that, then digital will always provide you an opportunity, or the e-com space, to move forward on that. And it's just about willingness to learn and be resilient enough when you don't know something, basically.
This was Iradj Boroumand, head of e-commerce at SC Johnson Europe. Christina, what are your takeaways?
I would say, first of all, it's very clear that the shopper and consumer behaviors are still evolving, right? We cannot say that we know what's happening in the space. We know how digital works and what offline is. Yes, indeed, the pandemic was a big boom and we did see a lot of shifts, but we still see a lot of shifts being made as we go on.
Yeah, exactly. I also think that one thing that he said that was very interesting, and that's, I guess, normal as e-commerce gets more sophisticated, is the fact that you have to look at like all the different touch points with the consumer and which ones are actually being relevant, no? Because maybe it's not that last click that's being relevant, but it's actually upper along the funnel where you can actually make a difference as well.
At the end of the day, it's all about providing your consumers with an end-to-end experience that attends to their needs and what they are looking for in their relationship with your brand, right? And while you're at it, you need to be very intentional about how you are collecting, managing, and then utilizing data, which I think was the key topic across the conversation, and how all brands need to have a very clear strategy on how they deal with it.
Yeah, absolutely. One other thing that I like a lot about Iradj, and that's why I chased him for months to bring him back on the show, is that I think he's like a very good example of what a modern e-commerce leader should be. So he has the side of being very commercial, and I think he has like a profile that could well be a general manager in the future. But he's also, as we've seen in the conversation, highly up to date with the latest in the space from a more technical or geeky perspective, even if you like.
Exactly, because at the end of the day, as digital is getting more and more integrated into our business, you shouldn't be looking for someone who's just a specialist without having this overview holistically of what the business is and how it should be run.
Exactly. Well, thanks, Christina, for accompanying me another day. Thanks to our audience for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode of the FMCG Guys. Have a great day.